Animate Dead is an interesting example of how the rules of Magic have changed over time. It's also such an awesome card, both in power level and flavor. This is a really interesting card to talk about for a few reasons, so strap in and let's get started. I guess there is one more qualifier before we get started. Usually in these videos I just read the errata or what's on the first printing of the card, or just summarize the effect because it doesn't really matter too much. But one of the major points we're discussing today has a lot to do with the text. So we'll be discussing the text and how it's changed. So naturally, we'll start with the original text. Animate Dead is an enchant dead creature. Remember this, it'll be important later. That costs 1 and a black mana. Any creature in either player's graveyard comes into play on your side with -1 to its original power. If this enchantment is removed, or at end of game, target creature is returned to its owner's graveyard. Target creature may be killed as normal. Alright, so there's already a couple things we need to talk about here. That last line of target creature may be killed as normal may seem weird to newer Magic players, and to be fair, it is. Very old Magic cards tended to put what I would call the rulings on the cards themselves. So when they designed the cards, they would explain things they thought would be confusing. And it does kind of make sense that this might be confusing, especially when your rulebook makes no fucking sense, and there are no comprehensive rules that explain how things like this are supposed to work. If we work our way backwards up the card, the next bulk of the text is also pretty confusing. Why does it specify where it goes at the end of the game? The simple answer here is that ante is a mainstay mechanic of the game. At the time, the designers are under the impression ante will be used unless you specifically opt out of it. As a consequence of this perspective, cards that would exchange control throughout the game usually had some type of explainer text telling you that you don't get to keep the card just because you animated it or stole it or whatever. So as we look at this text from a modern perspective, over half the text on this card is kind of not even necessary. But if we look at the errata text, there's even more text, with most of this unnecessary text removed. We'll come back to this, but this is the reason this card is so interesting, or one of the reasons rather. This card has changed very little. It still works today as it did in 1993, but the rules around it have been made, well, comprehensive. And Animate Dead is a perfect example of a concept that's simple to understand, but hard to define in the rules. So let's go back and look at Enchant Dead Creature. Simple enough, right? Well, that doesn't actually work in the rules, because when you cast Animate Dead, it targets a creature in the graveyard. So far so good, right? Well, yeah, but then we bring the creature back to the battlefield, and now Animate Dead isn't enchanting a creature that it targeted in the graveyard. It's enchanting a creature on the battlefield, which it can't do, so it would fall off and the creature would die. This is pedantic, and I wouldn't be surprised if you think this is stupid, as it kind of is. But the cards do need to work within the rules, right? Otherwise that kind of undermines the entire system that they're built upon. Now, the rules in the early years of the game are messy, and we won't dive too deeply into all of that, but the wording on Animate Dead was changed in 5th edition as the rules got more defined and Animate Dead stopped really working as intended. So let's read the 5th edition and see how they chose to tackle it. Now, it is no longer an enchant dead creature, or an enchant creature, or an enchantment aura, as we would say today. Instead, it is an enchantment that becomes a creature enchantment after it pulls a creature from the graveyard. When Animate Dead comes into play, put a creature into play and Animate Dead becomes a creature enchantment that targets that creature. That is kind of a neat way to get around the rules baggage, and it does kind of functionally work. But it also kind of messes with the immersion when you have to do stuff like this, and I would say it's worth it to make the card work, but the issue here is that now the card does interact differently in certain niche situations. Now, to be fair, I can't actually think of any situations this affects, but it's an enchantment, not a creature enchantment when it's cast. There are probably some cards that would now interact with this differently. Now, this might not be a huge deal, and it probably isn't, but it's also not ideal. Generally, it's really cool when you can keep a card working exactly as it always has, even if the rules kind of complicate that. Now, they would eventually come up with a wording that makes this card function as closely as possible to its original wording, and this text would be errata text that would appear online before it made it to a card, but it would eventually be printed in some supplementary thing, and eventually make its way into Eternal Masters, where the wording would be as follows. Enchantment Aura. Yes, now we are doing auras, but it's really just a term to remove the confusion between enchantments and enchantments. Yeah, it was a good term to bring in. Anyway, enchant creature card in a graveyard. When Animate Dead enters the battlefield, if it's on the battlefield, it loses enchant creature card in a graveyard and gains enchant creature put onto the battlefield with Animate Dead. Return enchanted creature card to the battlefield under your control and attach Animate Dead to it. When Animate Dead leaves the battlefield, that creature's controller sacrifices it. Simple stuff, right? Yeah, sometimes cool ideas that are simple to understand turn out to be really complicated to fit into a set of rules with very defined zones and rules between how those zones interact. Magic has difficulty with cards interacting between zones and remembering things when they change zones, which is usually a net positive for the rules engine, but does make cards like Animate Dead pretty unwieldy. And this is kind of one of the most interesting things about Animate Dead's history. It's not the only interesting thing about Animate Dead, though. Have you ever heard of Worldgorger Dragon? Because this card is a fucking wild ride. When Worldgorger Dragon enters the battlefield, all other permanents you control are exiled. This includes your lands, by the way. When Worldgorger Dragon leaves play, all your permanents come back into play. Now, what does this have to do with Animate Dead, you might be wondering? Well, if you use Animate Dead, or Dance of the Dead, or Necromancy on a Worldgorger Dragon, the Animate Dead will be exiled along with all your permanents. This will cause your Worldgorger Dragon to die, which will trigger your permanents to come back, and come back untapped. Then, when the Animate Dead comes back, you target the Worldgorger Dragon and tap your lands or make use of whatever triggers you are using. Then the Worldgorger Dragon comes back and your permanents get exiled, and you kind of see where I'm going with this, right? This is, in my opinion, the coolest fucking combo of all time in Magic, and no other way of generating infinite anything has as much chest hair as Worldgorger Dragon loops. This is the most dangerous combo to be using, and you're on a razor's edge the entire time. And there's two main reasons for this. Reason one, if you do this without having a second creature that isn't a Worldgorger Dragon in either graveyard, you have created a loop that cannot stop, and the game ends in a draw. This is sort of like crashing a computer game by initiating an endless loop, and it's so fucking funny to me that you can crash a paper game of Magic the Gathering. It's such a complex and interesting system. Reason 2 this combo has more chest hair than anything else is that if your opponent kills your Worldgorger Dragon in response to the trigger that exiles all your permanents, then the trigger bringing all of your permanents back will resolve before the exiling your permanents trigger. There won't be any permanents to return, then your entire board will be exiled, and you're pretty much entirely fucked. If that's not living and dying by the sword, I don't know what is. I love this combo. I think this is the funniest shit of all time. But this is just kind of a sidebar. We are here to talk about Animate Dead, not Worldgorger Dragon. Animate Dead is a cool card, and it's a simple card that reads incredibly complicated because of some niche interactions in the rules. And that's really interesting. I guess I don't have too much more to say about it. It's just very cool and kind of interesting how as the rules have developed, certain ideas have become harder to well, explain. But yeah, Animate Dead is a really cool card. So let's talk about the art. Anson Maddox did the original art of Animate Dead, and it's really awesome, in my opinion. I love the harsh contrast of the colors he uses in this piece, and the details are lovely. It really fits the story of the card. I personally love it a lot. It is far from the only art for Animate Dead, though. The next art appeared in a premium deck series, whatever supplemental product that might be, and it was illustrated by Anthony Jones. This art is really solid for the version, but it does miss out on some things that I really appreciate from the original art. It's well done and definitely fits the Magic aesthetic of the time. It's just not my personal favorite aesthetic. It's not a bad piece of art, it's just not a piece that I particularly love. But then, Eternal Masters brought this card back with another new piece of art. This one illustrated by Bastien L. Deharme, and this piece is really fucking cool and iconic. I still love the original art more, but this one has something I can't quite place that the last one didn't. Maybe it's as simple as the bit of purple giving it more color? I really couldn't tell you, but I do really appreciate this art. Then we have this banger. Helge C. Balzer illustrated this Judge promo from 2022, and I think the part of this card that's especially interesting is that it uses the original wording from Alpha. That's kinda neat, right? But the art itself is probably my favorite. I really love the original art for this, but this piece is so fucking cool. A wicked, grotesque dinosaur corpse is just the Animate Dead art I didn't know I needed until I saw it. It's so fucking cool. This piece is pretty rare though, like this was only printed once as a Judge promo. And then the last piece of art for Animate Dead that we have to talk about is the Iron Maiden secret layer. I will say that Iron Maiden's art style is very similar to early Magic's, and the themes they explore in their album art and such lend me to appreciate this secret layer more than most of them. The art on this one is just credited to being illustrated by Iron Maiden, which is kinda rad as hell. I do really like this art, but I also have always appreciated their album arts, so that makes sense. But yeah, Animate Dead is a super interesting effect that's flavorful and really adds depth to the game. I really love the card and its art, all of them honestly. Some more than others, but hey, you'll have that. But I think that's really all I have to say about this card. So I'll leave anything else up to you guys in the comments. I'm excited to hear your perspectives if you're interested in sharing them. But yeah, like the video if you liked it. You can subscribe if you give a shit, but either way, I hope you have a magical day. Thanks for watching.